Good morning. This is the time and place for the Planning Hearing Officer's hearing for November 6th, 2013. My name is Kristen Asp, and I will be conducting the hearings as hearing officer. We have one case on the agenda today, and the relevant exhibits are posted on the panels located directly behind me. If the evidence presented in the application at the hearing meets the criteria described in the findings for a case, the planning hearing officer can either approve or impose conditions for approval on the case in question. If the findings of fact are not evident, then the request will be denied. Public notice. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by use of public notices which were mailed to property owners and occupants of property within 500 feet of the subject property, physically posted on the site in question, and placed in the local newspaper. The hearing will proceed as follows. Description of the application or request will be read. Any relevant reports or comments received from other city departments, other letters or communications from interested parties will be read. I will ask the case planner to make a brief overview of the case, give analysis, and make a recommendation. The applicant will then be asked to come forward, stating both name and address, and will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. Others in the audience who wish to speak will be asked to come forward, stating both name and address, and will have a 3-minute time limit. The applicant will then be given the opportunity to make closing comments if desired in response to any testimony given by preceding speakers within a 5-minute time limit. The hearing will then be closed and the case taken under submission. As far as the decision goes, after the hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing and will be in the form of a letter sent to the applicant and to all persons who responded to the public notice, either by speaking at this hearing or by submitting written responses and have provided their name and mailing address. The date of the decision will be the date appearing on the letter, not necessarily the date of this hearing. Appeals. Under the appeal provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.62 of the Glendale Municipal Code, the decision may be appealed to the Planning Commission within 15 days of the decision date on the notice, and the notice of appeal shall be filed with the Building and Safety Division located in this building on the first floor at MSB 101. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the speaker forms, which have been provided at the front door, and give it to our planning staff. I would also like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of the planning hearing officer's hearing are recorded on tape as part of the public record. So, getting to the actual agenda. The one and only case on today's agenda is at 1811 to 1815 South Glendale Avenue. It is the Armenian Youth Association. It is for a parking reduction permit. The applicant is Con Consulting, and the project description is an application for a parking reduction permit to allow the Armenian Youth Association to continue operation of the Youth Assembly Hall without providing the minimum required 55 parking spaces located at 1811 to 1815 South Glendale Avenue in the C3 Community Services Zone. At this point, I'd like to ask the case planner to give a brief overview, and we'll go from there.
All right. Good morning, Ms. Asp. The applicant is requesting approval of a parking reduction permit to allow the Armenian Youth Association of Glendale to continue operation of the Youth Assembly Hall located at 1811 through 1815 South Glendale Avenue without providing the minimum amount of code-required on-site parking spaces. Variances were granted to allow less parking for this use in 1996, 1998, and 2003. No changes to the site, building, or the operation of the facility are proposed as a result of the present application. The zoning code requires 55 parking spaces for this use. The applicant is proposing 21 on-site spaces. Actually, there are 21 on-site spaces existing on the site now, and that's what they're proposing. The Youth Assembly Hall operates differently than most assembly facilities, and therefore the parking requirements for the assembly land use in the zoning code is actually greater than what is needed by the present use. The Youth Assembly Hall provides services for at-risk youth, personal development, and cultural education. and there are very few special events on the site. The hall has operated since 1996, and no complaints regarding parking have been received at this point since 1996. The applicant has submitted a parking count for the site, and the maximum number of parking spaces occupied was 19 spaces, and that was during a weeknight around 8 o'clock at night. No city departments had concerns regarding this application. The purpose of the parking regulations is to provide suitable parking, sufficient parking, so that nearby land uses are not negatively impacted. The existing parking lot contains 21 parking spaces, which have the necessary width, length, and turning radius to maneuver on the site. The traffic and transportation section have previously reviewed the driveway and circulation patterns, and no changes to the driveway or the circulation patterns are proposed as a result of the present application. The Youth Assembly Hall has operated for 17 years at the site with no ill effects related to the reduction in the required number of parking spaces. The existing 21 on-site parking spaces have been sufficient for the existing use, and no complaints regarding the lack of parking have been brought to the city's attention. A valet attendant will be required to regulate parking when the occasional event occurs where more than 30 people are expected. And that is actually a current requirement from the previous variances. Potential future uses of the site will need to either get a new parking reduction permit approved or provide the minimum number of parking spaces needed for that use at the time that they are proposed. Staff is recommending approval of the parking reduction permit with conditions. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kiesel. I will, I think, just turn to the applicant and the only speaker card I have.
Good morning, Ms. Asp.
Good morning.
And city staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located at 1111 North Brand Boulevard, Suite 403 here in the city of Glendale. Excuse me. The Armenian Youth Association of California is the organization that owns this facility and that operates this facility. They've been at this facility, it was mentioned, for the last 17 years. It's actually been a little bit longer. But in terms of the organization, it has operated exactly as Mr. Kiesel pointed out. They serve the youth, the at-risk youth. They serve for personal development, and they provide cultural education. Nothing has changed at this facility over the years. It's the same square footage, it's the same hours of operation, which I'll speak to later, and it's the same facility in terms of the parking that's been provided. And that 21 on-site parking spaces has been more than sufficient for the last 20-plus years. The difference or changes that we see today is the City of Glendale requirements. In the past, it was a standards variance for parking. Now it's called a parking reduction request. Thus, we're asking for the parking reduction request. In terms of the adjacent land uses, because it's always interesting to note what surrounds us, directly north of us is a parking lot for the Cerritos Park. To the south is an automobile service station. To the west is the actual park itself. And to the east is Forest Lawn. Forest Lawn is a very, very large facility. In terms of where exactly we are located, it's a portion of Forest Lawn that is actually in the city of Los Angeles. And then further north, it's in the city of Glendale, and further south, it has a portion in the city of Glendale. That area of Forest Lawn is used primarily for the maintenance of their facilities, the services, and also for their administrative purposes as well. So in terms of our surrounding land uses, we have no residential single-family, multifamily, or any other types of uses that could potentially be impacted by this facility in any way. The intent of the parking regulations, if I speak to the findings that need to be made, in terms of the land uses, I just described to you the adjacent land uses. There has been no negative impacts whatsoever, either from a public safety perspective or from a private business or operation perspective, or in this case, a governmental perspective because of the parks and the schools. Over the years, there's been no complaints, there's been no issues at all. The Armenian Youth Association conducts itself in a very professional, organized manner. The parking layout itself, as you see from the site plan that's been provided, the circulation pattern, you enter off of Glendale Avenue, you enter into the parking area, it's safe, it's traverses, there's additional or sufficient space for the parking width, length, for the backup area, and for the maneuverability. Also on the site, or adjacent to the site, I should say, is a public alley. And that alley predominantly just serves this facility. And you'll notice that it's on the south portion of the site plan. And you're pointing to it right there. Yeah. That is a public alley. At some point in the near future, we may ask that public alley to be vacated, but this is not the hearing for that. But predominantly, it just serves this facility. Yes. Next, explain how the existing parking demand is currently provided. As I mentioned, the building is owned and operated by the Armenian Youth Association of California. It's the one and only single tenant. There's no multi-tenants on the site. The hours of operation, and I want to speak to that a little bit because those have not changed over the past 17, 18, 20 years. The hours of operation that we have approved for, we have approved Monday through Thursday from 5 p.m. to midnight, Friday from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., Saturday from 9 a.m. to 2 a.m., and Sunday from 9 a.m. to midnight. And we would want to keep those same hours in terms of the allowed operation. Now that I've said that, let me share with you what a typical weekday would be and a typical weekend would be. Typically, a weekday would be from 5 p.m. to about 10 p.m. That's a typical weekday in terms of the operation. But once again, we want to have that ability and that flexibility as we have for so many years to go to the hours that I mentioned. Part of this request says provide a space breakdown for each of the land uses. Well, there's only one land use. And the hours and times from 6 a.m. to midnight. So if I look at the chart that's been provided, there's really no one coming to the facility at all or operating the facility until about 5 p.m. And the reason that that's notable is that that's usually when the other businesses that are adjacent and the school nearby is either closed because their workday is over or is winding down. So in terms of this facility, it's actually very complementary in terms of the hours of operation and as it relates to parking, because that's why we're here today. The peak time during the week for parking is about 8 p.m. and it doesn't use up all the parking, but it comes close. And that's not on every weekday. That's occasionally, and that's a worst-case scenario. And typically what happens during the the weekday is that you have different committees that this organization has. And so there may be a committee that meets for maintenance of the facility. There may be a committee that meets for preparation for the youth activities. There's a whole host of different facilities that different, my mind is going blank here. Committees. Thank you. Different committees that are provided, and they operate during the weekday. Usually on the weekends is when you have the youth activities, and it could be anything from cultural training to different songs that are being taught, counseling for at-risk youth, things like that. And that's predominantly how this facility is operated. It's mainly volunteers, so that's why you see people who work during the day, and then they'll come in the evenings to volunteer for these different committees. And that's the hours, and that's the function, and that's for a typical weekday. As it relates to a weekend, you typically don't have events scheduled. However, when there is events scheduled, they are for different special occasions. Sometimes it's a funeral. Sometimes it's a remembrance. Sometimes it's a reception. So it kind of varies. And what I did was, as I provided in the chart, I showed that if I picked an event, because it's not every week, if I picked an event, it probably would start in the evening and would go to midnight or potentially past midnight. But as I mentioned before, there's no sensitive receptors or there's no uses around us that would be impacted. And that doesn't happen that often. You may have one event a month, you may have 2 events a month. But once again, we want to have that flexibility to be able to keep and maintain those hours of operation that I previously mentioned. The last item as it relates to the zoning ordinance and the finding that discusses why is the zoning code requirements greater than what will actually be needed. Well, this is an excellent example of a case in point where we've been operating for almost 2 decades there. And same manner, same facility, same organization, same everything. And those 21 parking spaces have been more than sufficient. So that in of itself tells us that the zoning code in this particular case is a little higher than what is actually needed. In conclusion, I did review the staff report. I did review the conditions of approval. We agree, obviously, to comply with all of them. One of the things I did want to request, though, is because this organization owns the facility and has been operating in such a professional manner for so long, this last approval that we had was granted for a 10-year time period. I would ask that if you so see fit, that we be granted a 15-year time period this time. There's been no issues. There's been no complaints. As I mentioned previously, they've operated in such a professional manner, they should be rewarded for that. Anyway, I'll conclude my remarks. If you have questions, I'll be happy to provide answers.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So, thank you for sort of outlining how this operates and kind of the committees during the week and potentially events on the weekends. And the focus of this is for at-risk Armenian youth. Is that or is it a little broader than that?
No, Ms. Asp, it's not just at-risk youth. It's Armenian youth. It's
in
youth
general.
in our.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not just the
Right.
at-risk. It's a whole variety, but it's to service the youth of our community.
Okay.
So.
And so for most of the week, it seems like it's the volunteers and the committees that are meeting, not necessarily youth activities maybe that are going on during the week, or?
That is correct.
Okay.
Predominantly, and I don't want to say it's 100%, but predominantly, yes, that's correct. Because what happens is the children have school, they have other responsibilities. In the evenings, as I mentioned, most of the folks are volunteers, some of them here today. They have regular jobs. They come in the evenings, they meet in committees, they discuss things, what they're going to be doing. For instance, if the kids are out of school during the summer, what type of events, where do they want to take them to, what are the different activities they want to do. And then the different committees, I mentioned some of them, related to building maintenance, public relations, outreach, all those types of things, and those are by the adults during the week. Then predominantly, it's the children on the weekend when they're out of school. Mm-hmm. They have the ability to come in and be trained and discuss different things as it relates to cultural issues or any other issues like that.
Okay. Moving on to maybe like a special event, let's say. Mm-hmm. And it seems that there's consistently been the requirement for a valet requirement when an event gets over 30 people.
Right.
Has that typically worked out well? I mean,
Yeah, there hasn't been problems. One of the things, and we were talking about this before the hearing started, is there is a large parking lot that's directly north of us that services the Cerritos Park. It would be very nice, because in the evenings, when the park facility is closed, to have access to those additional parking spaces. So in terms of being able to have additional parking spaces, that would be great. But to answer your question, has it been a problem with a valet for 30? No, it has not.
because that's good to know, because I don't the park and that sort of redo is relatively new in comparison to how long this
Facility
they've
has been there.
And so that parking lot may be new to the north. Okay. And I noticed that Mr. Kiesel didn't make any recommendations for hours of operation. I noticed that they were in previous approvals from past variances, and that there's at this point, no recommendation for a time frame. Right.
No, I was just looking at that to make sure, and you're right. I didn't
Okay.
make a
Okay, but
recommendation.
if I'm clear, I think the applicant is asking for 15 at
Yes.
this point.
Yes, we're asking for 15 years.
Okay. And because I typically I drove by last night, so I don't know if something was going on, but I did see either a valet or a security or something that was out front. So it seemed like, and it was after 5 o'clock, and probably when most people show up.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there are any other thoughts I have on where these guys are going. But it wouldn't be, I mean, in keeping flexibility of all the uses that go on, if there was to be a future idea of tutoring on weeknights for, that, kids would be coming there also during the week and after 5 o'clock, so it wouldn't just necessarily be committees only or just normal business of
No, it predominantly
All their
is that.
activities.
If it was, it would be a small handful of youth. So it's not a large facility.
Okay.
In terms of its size. It's less than 4,000 square feet. And if you look at the floor plans, there's some ancillary offices, and then there's about a 1,900 or 2,000 square foot kind of area that's where your parking gets calculated from in terms of the assembly. So there's not a lot of space, and there's not a lot of youth that would be coming if it was for tutoring and things like that. It's not a business venture, right?
Sure.
So it's more as if the youth need assistance and they need help, they come there and they could speak to the adults and
Right,
in
right.
terms of the training and things like that.
I didn't mean it in a business sense, but in a
Sure.
homework hour or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And youth, I don't want to put an age to it, but is there a typical range of ages that you get the most participation from?
Youth 5 to...
Maybe come on.
Yeah, my name is Ara Mardirosyan. I live in Glendale 4 years, 610 East Chestnut, Glendale, California. As a matter of fact, I am one of the board member for Armenian Youth Association of California. We have kids ranging from 5 years to the youth to 22, 23 years.
Okay.
The youth tutoring usually are on weekends, Saturday and Sundays. Approximately the maximum the tutoring kids that we had was about 20 to 25 kids, max, on weekends.
Okay.
But during the weeks, we don't have youth functioning, kids functioning in the club. Facility is very quiet. No problem. Good standing with the neighbors. Help to the Cerritos School District, Glendale School District. At the time when the Cerritos School District was in construction, our facilities parking lot was open to them 24 hours. So we have good standing with all neighbors around us. As a matter of fact, no problem, no incident. We are functioning 21 years in Glendale. In this building, 17 years. 21 years, clear record. Either the church don't have that records.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that those are all the questions that I have
Great.
for the morning. If there's anything else?
No, we appreciate your consideration, and we hope that you approve this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take this under submission. The hearing is now adjourned.